There was a man who loved his son too visibly, and the whole world paid for it. Jacob had 12 sons, but Joseph lived in a different light. You could see it in the way the old man's eyes followed the boy across the field. You could see it in the gift, a coat of many colors, long-sleeved, ornate, the kind of garment that said to every brother standing in the dust, "This one is set apart." Jacob meant it as love. He did not see the fire he was lighting. The brothers saw it every single day, in what begins as a quiet ache, the feeling of being looked past, of being adequate where another is beloved. That ache, fed for years without address, becomes something darker. Resentment does not announce itself. It accumulates, it waits, and in the house of Jacob it was waiting, quiet and patient, for the moment it would finally move. Then came the dreams. Joseph was 17, and God placed images in him the way a craftsman sets a stone, deliberately, permanently, at cost. He dreamed the sheaves of his brothers bowing to his sheaf. He dreamed the sun and the moon and 11 stars making obeisance to him. Now, whether a wiser or older man would have held those dreams more carefully, we cannot say. Joseph spoke them aloud, and the brothers heard a 17-year-old boy tell them, in the vocabulary of visions, that they would one day bow to him. His father rebuked him and kept the saying in his heart. His brothers hated him all the more. But here is what we must understand about those dreams. Joseph did not manufacture them. He did not climb into ambition and dream his way to power. God put those images in him, and the cost of carrying a God-given vision when you are young and unformed and surrounded by people who resent you, that cost has no ceiling. The day came when Jacob sent Joseph out to check on his brothers in the field near Shechem, and then further to Dothan. Imagine the walk, a boy in a distinctive coat, crossing open ground, carrying bread and the unguarded trust of a father who believed the world was simply the world. The brothers saw him coming from a long way off, and the sight of that coat undid everything they had been holding. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Let us kill him. Let us throw him in a pit and say a wild animal devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, intervened. Not enough to fully stop it, not enough to send Joseph home, but enough to keep blood off their hands. They stripped the coat that had been the visible symbol of everything they resented, the fabric of their father's favoritism. They stripped it from him first, and they threw Joseph into a pit. The text is almost brutal in its matter-of-factness. The pit was empty. There was no water in it, and then the brothers sat down to eat bread. The emotional distance in that detail is staggering. Their brother is in the pit, and they are eating. Then Ishmaelite traders appeared on the road, heading down toward Egypt. And Judah, who would one day become the most important voice in this story, said, "What profit is there in killing him? Let us sell him." And so they did. 20 pieces of silver. That is what Joseph's life cost his brothers. And the traders took him, and the caravan moved south, and Joseph went down into Egypt. Down. That word matters. In this story, every movement away from God's promise is a descent. The pit was down, Egypt was further down, and there would be more descending before the ascension came. The brothers took the coat, that coat, and they killed a young goat and dipped it in the blood and brought it to their father. Jacob recognized it immediately. He tore his clothes, He put on sackcloth. He refused to be comforted. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him. But he said, "No, I will go down to my grave mourning my son." And Jacob wept for Joseph. Now the weight of that lie settled onto the brothers' shoulders. Not a single moment of confession and consequence, but a lifetime of carrying the knowledge of what they had done, in the presence of a father who never stopped grieving. That is its own kind of prison. Meanwhile, Joseph arrived in Egypt. He was bought by a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. And here is where the narrative makes one of its most important moves. It would be reasonable, entirely reasonable, for Joseph to have arrived in Potiphar's house broken, withdrawn, going through the motions of survival, while something inside him quietly died. He had every human justification for bitterness. His brothers had sold him. His father believed him dead. He was in a foreign country whose language he had to learn, serving a man whose name he had just been told. But the text says, "The Lord was with Joseph." Not the Lord appeared to Joseph in a vision. Not the Lord spoke to Joseph in the night. Simply, the Lord was with Joseph. And that presence expressed itself in a very particular way, in Joseph's daily excellence. He served Potiphar with such diligence, such faithfulness, such competence, that Potiphar noticed. Potiphar made him overseer over his house. He put everything he had in Joseph's hand. And the text says, "The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake." Integrity, when it is genuine, has a kind of gravity. It draws responsibility to itself. Joseph was not performing virtue for an audience. He was faithful when the audience was God alone, which is precisely why what happened next is so devastating. Potiphar's wife saw Joseph, and the text is direct. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. She wanted him. Day after day she pressed him, and day after day Joseph refused. He said, "My master has put everything in my hand. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Notice that. He did not say, "I cannot do this because Potiphar would punish me." He said, "How can I sin against God?" The audience he was playing to was not human. It never had been. Then came the day when no one else was in the house, and she grabbed his garment, and he fled. He left his garment in her hand and ran. She turned the rejected garment into evidence, and she lied. Potiphar heard his wife's accusation, and his anger burned, and he took Joseph and put him in prison. A second descent, deeper than the pit. Joseph had clawed his way, through faithfulness, to a position of genuine dignity and influence, and the cost of maintaining his integrity was the loss of everything, again. The prison, a third location in as many chapters of his life. And yet, the text repeats itself with an insistence that feels almost defiant. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners, and whatever was done there, Joseph was the one doing it. The Lord was with him. Whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. I want you to sit in that for a moment. This is a man who has been betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into an Egyptian prison. He has done nothing wrong. He has been faithful at every point, and the reward for his faithfulness, humanly speaking, has been continued suffering. This is not a prosperity gospel story. This is something deeper and more honest. The story of a man whose integrity remained intact precisely because his understanding of God was not transactional. He was not faithful because he expected ease. He was faithful because the God who was with him was worth being faithful to, regardless of the circumstances. Then 2 men arrived in the prison, the cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh's household. Both of them had offended the king. Both of them had been placed in custody. And one morning Joseph came to them and saw that they were troubled. He asked, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said something that is easy to pass over, but contains everything. "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." He did not claim the gift for himself. He pointed immediately to the source. He had been given a capacity for the interpretation of dreams, the same capacity that had gotten him thrown into the pit in the first place. And here in prison, he offered it again, freely, without calculation. The cupbearer told his dream: 3 branches, blossoming, grapes pressed into Pharaoh's cup, the cup placed in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph interpreted, "Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as you used to do." Then Joseph made one request. He said, "Only remember me when it is well with you. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place. I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing that deserved the pit." The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, shared his dream: 3 cake baskets on his head, birds eating from the uppermost basket. Joseph interpreted, "Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh." 3 days later was Pharaoh's birthday. He restored the cupbearer. He hanged the baker, exactly as Joseph had said, and the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of the prison and the daily faithfulness and the hope that had been extended and then not answered. We do not know what those 2 years cost Joseph in the interior. The text does not tell us. What we know is that at the end of them, he was still in the prison, and he was still the man the Lord was with. Because what is faith if not the refusal to let unanswered years redefine what you believe about God? Then Pharaoh had dreams. He was standing by the Nile, and 7 cows came up out of the river, sleek, fat, grazing in the reed grass. And then 7 more cows came up, ugly and thin, such as the land of Egypt had never seen for ugliness. And the thin cows ate the fat cows, and Pharaoh woke. He fell asleep again and dreamed a second time: 7 ears of grain, plump and good, growing on one stalk, and 7 thin, blighted ears swallowed them up. Pharaoh woke troubled. He called for the magicians of Egypt, all the wise men, and no one could interpret the dreams. And then, finally, after 2 years, the cupbearer's memory woke. He said to Pharaoh, "I remember my offenses today. There was a young Hebrew man in the prison with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them, and it came about exactly as he interpreted. They sent for Joseph. he was brought hastily out of the dungeon. The text includes a detail that I love. He shaved himself and changed his clothes and came in before Pharaoh. He had been in a pit and a prison and a foreign country for years. He came before the most powerful man in the known world, unannounced, unprepared, having been a prisoner that same morning, and yet he came clean. He composed himself. He stood before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And Joseph said, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He was still doing it, still deflecting the credit to its source, still pointing past himself to the God who gave him everything he had. Pharaoh told him the dreams, and Joseph interpreted with a clarity that was total and immediate. 7 fat cows and 7 good ears. 7 years of great abundance throughout the land of Egypt. 7 thin, ugly cows and 7 blighted ears. 7 years of famine, so severe that the abundance will be forgotten. And then Joseph did something that Pharaoh had not asked for. He said, "Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint overseers, and take 1/5 of the produce of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. Let them gather all the food of these good years, and store up grain for food in the cities, so there will be food for the nation when the 7 years of famine come." He did not just interpret the dream, he solved the problem the dream revealed. He showed up from the dungeon with a policy proposal. Pharaoh turned to his servants and said, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then he turned to Joseph. He said, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and dressed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in his 2nd chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. That same morning he had been a prisoner. That same morning, and now the 2nd chariot of Egypt was his. Joseph was 30 years old, 13 years from the pit, 13 years of descent, from the field in Canaan to the pit to Potiphar's house to the prison. And then in a single morning, the ascent. Not gradually, not incrementally. In a morning, Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt, and the 7 years of abundance came exactly as God had said. And Joseph gathered grain like the sand of the sea, vast beyond measure, and he stored it in the cities. During those years, Joseph had 2 sons. The first he named Manasseh, which means, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The second he named Ephraim, which means, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Even in the naming of his children, Joseph was making theology. He was saying, God was in the hardship. God was in the affliction. God made me fruitful in the very place that tried to break me. Then the 7 years of abundance ended, and the 7 years of famine began. The famine was not local. The text says all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. The famine reached Canaan. It reached the house of Jacob. Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain there, that we may live and not die." And the 10 older brothers of Joseph went down to Egypt to buy grain, down into Egypt, into the presence of the brother they had sold. Joseph was the governor over the land, the one who sold to all the people, and his brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. The text pauses on this moment. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. He said, "Where do you come from?" They said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Joseph recognized his brothers. They did not recognize him. A boy of 17 in a pit, weeping in a language they shared. They would not have imagined him here, dressed in the authority of Egypt, grown into the face of a man who ruled nations. But Joseph knew them immediately, and the dreams, the sheaves bowing, the 11 stars, came back to him in a rush. He remembered, he saw not just who they were, but what God had been doing across all those years. And the weight of that recognition was so great that he had to contain it. He accused them of being spies. They protested. "We are honest men, your servants, 12 brothers, sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." Joseph, and here is one of the most remarkable acts of emotional restraint in all of Scripture, turned away from them and wept. He turned away, gathered himself, returned, and continued the test. He did not reveal himself, not yet. He put Simeon in prison as surety, and sent the rest back to Canaan with grain, and their silver returned in their sacks. And he told them, "Do not come back without your youngest brother." On the way home, they found the silver in their sacks, and they were afraid. They said to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" And when they told Jacob everything, Simeon in prison, the demand for Benjamin, Jacob said, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." The famine continued. They ate through the grain, and Jacob finally said, "Go again, buy us a little food." And Judah said, "Here is Judah," the one who had suggested selling Joseph, speaking now in a voice that has been changed by years and guilt and the grief on his father's face. He said, "The man solemnly warned us that we shall not see his face unless our brother is with us. Send Benjamin with me, and I will be a pledge of his safety. If I do not bring him back and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever." Jacob gave in. They took double the silver. They took the gifts. They took Benjamin, and they went down again to Egypt. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, his brother, his own mother's son, he said to his steward, "Bring these men to my house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men are to dine with me at noon." And when they came to Joseph's house, they were afraid. They thought, "It is because of the silver that was returned in our sacks." They said to the steward, "We brought the money back in full." And the steward said, "Peace to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." And he brought Simeon to them. And then Joseph came home, and they brought him the gifts, and they bowed down to him to the ground. He asked them, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" And he said to Benjamin, "God be gracious to you, my son. and he hurried out because his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, composed himself, and said, "Serve the food." But it was not over. There was one more test. He was not ready to reveal himself. He was watching for something. He needed to know if these were the same men who had thrown him into the pit, or if the years had done what suffering sometimes does, broken the selfishness out of them and made room for something better. He had them seated by birth order, which astonished them because they could not imagine how he knew. He sent Benjamin's portion 5 times larger than theirs. He was watching. Did they resent this? Did the favoritism of a foreign governor toward their youngest brother awaken the same old jealousy? Apparently not. They drank and were merry with him. Then in the morning he sent them home with grain, and he had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack. He sent his steward after them. "Why have you repaid evil for good? You have stolen my master's cup." They were overtaken. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack, and they tore their garments and loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. And they fell before Joseph, and Joseph said, "What deed is this you have done? The man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. As for the rest of you, go in peace to your father." He was watching, he was waiting, he was asking. When the choice is between Benjamin and freedom, what will you choose? And then Judah stepped forward. Judah, the architect of Joseph's sale, the man who had said 20 pieces of silver, and Judah spoke. If you have access to this speech in the text of Genesis 44, read it with everything you have, because it is one of the most extraordinary speeches in the entire Bible. He said, "Please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant." He recounted everything: the command to bring Benjamin, the father's reluctance, the pledge he had given with his own life. He said, "My father's life is bound up in the boy's life. And if the boy is not with him when I go back to my father, and my father sees that the boy is not with him, he will die," he said, "for your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." He offered himself. The man who had sold his brother for 20 pieces of silver was now offering to become a slave so that another brother could go free. Something had changed in Judah, something that only suffering and guilt and years could change. And Joseph saw it. He saw what he needed to see. He could not hold himself together anymore. He said, "Have everyone go out from me." And everyone went out. And Joseph wept. The text says he made such a loud weeping that the Egyptians heard it. This was not a contained moment, a private tear. This was a man crumbling from the inside. Years of restraint, years of holding the knowledge of who he was and what had been done to him and what God had made of it. All of it breaking open at once in the sound of his brother's self-sacrifice. And then, in the silence that followed, he said to his brothers, to men who did not yet know who he was, to men who had every reason to be terrified by whatever was about to happen, he said, "I am Joseph." 3 words, 3 syllables, and the world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the same breath. Is my father still alive? They could not answer him. They were terrified. He said, "Come near to me, come near." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." He did not soften the history. He did not erase it. He named it, "Whom you sold." And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. He said that, "Do not be angry with yourselves, for God sent me before you to preserve life." Listen to the theology in that sentence. Not, "God allowed what you did." Not, "God worked around what you did." God sent me before you. Joseph had looked at 13 years of suffering, at the pit and the slave traders, and the false accusation, and the prison, and the 2 years of the cupbearer's silence. He had looked at all of it through the lens of what he could now see: the family saved, the people preserved, the promise of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob still intact. And he said, "It was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry, go up to my father and say, 'Your son Joseph says to me, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry.'" He embraced Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that his brothers talked with him. He sent them back with wagons and provisions and silver and clothing and gifts. 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread. And he said, "Do not quarrel on the way." There is something almost tender in that last instruction, knowing these men and their history. The news came to Jacob like a resurrection, the messengers said. "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." The text says Jacob's heart became numb, because he did not believe them. But when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. He said, "It is enough. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And Jacob set out with everything he had. At Beersheba he stopped and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to him in visions of the night. He said, "Jacob, Jacob." And Jacob said, "Here I am." God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again." Jacob went down to Egypt with 70 souls of his household, and Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet his father in Goshen. When he saw him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Jacob said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." 22 years. That is roughly how long Jacob had believed his son was dead, and the reunion was not a comfortable scene of composed dignity. It was a man weeping on his father's neck a good while, and a father saying, "I can die now. I have seen your face." Joseph settled his family in the land of Goshen, the best of the land, and they had possessions there and were fruitful and multiplied. Jacob lived 17 years in Egypt, and when the time came that Jacob was near death, he called Joseph to him and made him swear that he would not bury him in Egypt, but carry him back to be buried with his fathers in the land of Canaan. Joseph swore it, and Jacob blessed Joseph's sons, crossing his hands, putting the greater blessing on the younger Ephraim over Manasseh. When Jacob died, Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. He commanded the physicians to embalm Israel, and Egypt wept for him 70 days. And Joseph asked Pharaoh's permission, and he took his father's body up to Canaan and buried him in the cave of Machpelah as Jacob had asked, and then they returned to Egypt. When the brothers saw that their father was dead, they were afraid. They said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the evil we did to him?" They sent a message to Joseph, claiming, "We cannot know if it was true or if they invented it, that Jacob before his death had commanded Joseph to forgive his brothers their transgression and their sin." And the brothers fell down before him and said, "We are your servants." Joseph wept when he read it. He wept because they still did not understand. He wept because all of this had already been settled in his heart. And here they were, years later, still afraid. He said to them, "Do not fear. Am I in the place of God?" They had asked the wrong question. The question was never, "Will Joseph forgive us?" The question was always, "What has God been doing?" Joseph answered both at once. "You intended to harm me." He said it plainly. He did not say, "It wasn't really harm." He did not say, "You were actually helping." He said, "You intended evil." And he said, "God intended it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." He comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This is the theological summit of the entire narrative. 2 intentions, 1 act. You intended evil. God intended good. The harm was real. The betrayal was real. The suffering was not minimized or spiritually airbrushed. And within all of it, around it, beneath it, working through it without erasing it, God was moving toward a purpose so much larger than any of them could see from inside their moment. That is not a comfortable truth. It is a costly one. It costs Joseph 13 years of suffering to earn the right to say it with credibility, and he says it without bitterness. That is the miracle, not the coat of many colors, not the interpretation of dreams, not even the rise to the second chariot of Egypt. The miracle is a man who looked at his own story, the whole story, the full weight of it, and chose to see the hand of God rather than only the hands of his brothers. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw the children of Ephraim to the 3rd generation. He saw the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh. And as the end of his life approached, he called his brothers to him and said, "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. God will surely visit you." And then, this is the last thing Joseph did with the breath he had left. He said, "Carry my bones up from here. Carry my bones up from here." He had been carried down into Egypt in chains at 17. He would be carried out of Egypt in faith. He did not know when. He did not know how many generations would pass between his death and that exodus. He did not know the name of Moses, but he knew the promise. He had staked his entire life on the faithfulness of God. And in his dying breath, he staked his very bones on the same promise. And the book of Exodus tells us that when Moses led the people out of Egypt, 400 years later, he took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made them swear it. A man so certain of what God would do that he made arrangements for a future he would never see. That is not optimism. That is not positive thinking. That is the specific, costly, tested faith of a man who had been in the pit and the prison and the palace, who had wept in hiding and wept in revelation and wept at reunion, and who at the end of all of it still believed that God keeps his word. So here is what I want to leave with you. You may be in a pit right now. You may be in a prison of circumstances you did not choose, wearing an accusation that does not belong to you, wondering why the years keep passing in silence. You may be the cupbearer who forgot, or the dreamer who is still waiting, or Jacob who has stopped believing he will ever see what he most loves again. The story of Joseph does not promise you ease. It does not promise you a second chariot by morning. What it promises is this: the Lord was with Joseph, in the pit, in the house, in the prison, in the palace. The location changed. The presence did not. And Joseph's bones, carried across centuries, carried through 400 years of slavery, carried by a man named Moses, who trusted the promise of a man he never met. Joseph's bones arrived in the land that had been promised before Joseph was born. Nothing God intends is lost. Not a year, not a dream, not a bone. Can you hold your own unanswered years the way Joseph held his? Not with clenched fists demanding explanation, but with open hands that still trust the God who sees further than you can. The story is not over. It never was.